Good day to everyone. My name is Oksana Pukhonska, and I am a professor of the Department of Ukrainian Language and Literature of the National University of Ostroh Academy. And today I want to share with you some results of my researching of the contemporary Ukrainian literature of war, which became the mirror of the events which took place in Ukraine and which took place in Ukrainian society from 2014. From the first months of the war that began in Donbass in 2014, the military text is becoming an important phenomenon that is gaining multi-phased interpretations. First of all, this text takes literature out of the exclusively artistic sphere, giving it features of functionality. It is about the ability to inform society about events at the front, about the life of Ukrainians in the war, about individual and collective experiences of actual trauma. Its priority is to talk about the emotional, mental, and physical aspects of war that other sources of information often generalize, simplify, or present from a certain ideological point of view. Ron Capps sees literature as a kind of effective and important weapon on the battlefield. He noted, "We put poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction alongside chemical weapons, intercontinental ballistic missiles with thermonuclear warheads and robotic drones. And in the process, we see how an imagination is used for fundamentally different purpose. Secondly, the text of war performs the function of historical understanding of its causes and consequences, taking as a basis the experience of the past. In other words, it represents the communicative memory of Ukrainian society connected with the colonial experience of Russian imperialism, most often Soviet totalitarianism, and with its most tragic manifestations, such as repressions, linguicide, ethnocide, forbidding of national self-determination, devaluation of the personality, his or her dignity and freedom. And thirdly, the literary text of the war performs a therapeutic function in several dimensions: in individual dimension, generational dimension, and in national dimension. It often represents texts written by authors who went through the most difficult stages of war with corresponding losses, both physical and mental. In this case, writing becomes a potential opportunity for self-expression when either there is a lack of suitable specialists for psychological therapy, or there is a lack of words to speak aloud the lived experience. And in this case, the problem of the creation of the language of war became very important and very actual. First of all, at the very beginning, I want to notice that we will be speaking during our lecture in the context of two meanings. In the context of traumatic memory, which is closely connected not only with the experience of the actual events of the actual war, or as we called it, the full-scale invasion, And the second meaning is unprocessed trauma, which we understand as a factor that most often provokes society to reevaluate the past and its significance in the present. First of all, I want to pay your attention to the prehistory of the process of creating the literature of war, or about the forming of grounds for appearing of such kind of literature. And the first aspect in this topic is anti-totalitarian literature. We mean the texts which were written during the 90s, from the very beginning of Ukrainian independence after the crash of USSR, belong to the young authors who were at that period at their 30s years old. And secondly, about the texts which came back to Ukraine from the Ukrainian diaspora, and to this diaspora belonged those writers who had opportunity to escape from the Soviet repression before the Second World War, at the 30s years of the 20th century, and also after the Second World War. In the first case, we are speaking about such authors and their creation as, for example, Oksana Zabushko, Yuri Andrukhovich, Taras Prokhashko, and others who are well known abroad, especially in the Western Europe. And their creations, such as, for example, Moscoviata of Yuri Andrukhovich, or the field researching of Ukrainian sex by Oksana Zabushko. In the second case, we can speak about, for example, Ivan Bagriany, who wrote about the Soviet concentration camps, or, for example, about Vasil Barka, who wrote about the starvation of 1932-1933. These texts appeared abroad, and only after the crashing of the Soviet Empire, they had gotten possibility to come back to Ukraine, to come back to Ukrainian readers. All those texts were written in such a way in which they unmasked Soviet totalitarianism and tried to show to the readers the essence of the Ukrainian question. What I mean? I mean how the Ukrainians relived those difficult 20th century, where they were, what was their role, and how they can to explain their experience of the victim of this period, because they have no possibility during the whole period of being the colony of the Soviet Empire. Ukrainians have no possibility even get knowing something about this hard experience. The second aspect, which gives us understanding how the literature of contemporary war could appear, is desovietization of literature, which also took place during the 90s, during the 90s years of the 20th century. So during the first decades of the Ukrainian independence. And here, the main role played the young authors, which was particularly named, and also the other authors, for example, such as Vasil mentioned Oksana Zabushko, Yuri Andrukhovich, for example, and also Vasil Kozelenko, Oles Ulyanenko, Volodymyr Yeshkelev, and others. and they didn't change the option of understanding and creating literature, but their literature just had gotten the new understanding between the readers as it reflected the new ways of creating of such things like Ukrainian identity. So in texts written by the mentioned authors, there were represented the vision, first of all, the vision of Ukrainian identity. Secondly, those authors tried to adopt the new, especially Western streams in art, such as postmodernism. Yes, in the center of this stream there was a free person without any doubts, without any dependence. This person which could understand him or herself in the way she or he wanted. And the third one in this aspect was generational nihilism in this literature. What I mean? I mean that the literature of the young authors and the behavior of the young authors was like something that tried to demask the behavior of the previous generation, especially in that way that the previous generation had no any chance to become the main representatives of the social thoughts and to become the main representatives of the new Ukrainian identity. Maybe such a situation we can call like a generational conflict. Yes, but what I mean, the elder generation, for example, the 60s, had their own vision of independence of the Ukraine and independence of the Ukrainians. They tried to find a compromise between the Soviet past and between the independence future. And this compromise had to reflect contemporarity of 90s. Younger authors, couldn't adopt this vision of literature and this vision of reality. They have their own, and their literature couldn't be closely connected with any experience of literary creation in the past. Because in the Soviet past, there was only one permitted artistic style, social realism. Elder authors didn't want to adopt the new streams in the art. Young authors didn't want to refuge from the new challenges. They wanted these challenges, and these challenges couldn't, in their vision, couldn't be connected only with the, for example, national question. Yes, for example, with their thinking of the past. For example, with something like this. And the third aspect in this context is literature of memory. Or literature of the experience. These kinds of texts appeared in the early 2000s, especially in the first decades of the new century. They belong to the same authors who were the young authors at the 90s, yes, but they didn't change their understanding of literature. But in some time, they understood that there are some things which are not understandable at the same period, and which don't give us possibility to solve all the problems which are here and now. Cultural problems, economical problems, political problems, mental problems, identity problems, etc., and so on, so on. Such kind of literature tried to rethink of the past, especially to rethink the experience of the Second World War, which after the 10 years of Ukrainian independence, still in the influence of Soviet myth and stereotypes. Among such texts which just reflect all the problems and reflect new vision of this kind of past is, for example, the Museum of Abandoned Secrets of Oksana Pukhonska, or, for example, Solo for Solomia by Volodymyr Lis, or Tango of the Death of Yuri Vennechuk, and so on. The next one, the next thing which explains this kind of literature, the literature of memory and the literature of experience, is creating of the Ukrainian narrative of memory. For Ukrainians, was very important to realize and even to open their experience of the past, of the 20th century, because they had some knowledges about from the point of view of history, but it was knowledges which Ukrainians get from their school books, which they get from some rare films or some rare books, but they didn't have the full picture, the full understanding of this past. And this past could be understood only with the help of realizing it as the experience of our parents, as the experience of our grandparents, as the experience of our neighbors, etc. So this literature, especially mentioned by me texts, create this new narrative of memory, new narrative of traumatic experience of the past, traumatic experience of the 20th century. And the third option of this literature is the process of deconstruction of the Soviet, especially Russian, role or vision of Ukraine in the history of 20th century. In this option, Ukraine has not a full possibility for realize its own independence. Because, for example, such kind myths as the brotherhood between Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, such kind of myths as the victory of the Soviet people in the Second World War, where Ukrainians has no any possibility to get their own voice in this history. These things just didn't give us possibility to become ourselves. And literature reflected all of these, literature of this period reflected all of these problems from the point of view of memory, of the experience, life experience. So these three aspects were very good ground for the appearing of the literature of the war. Because in this context, the war wasn't understood. This Russian-Ukrainian war, which started at the spring 2014, was not understood as something unpredictable. This war has a long tradition, has a long history, and this history have had different phases. Some of these phases were active, some passive, and in this case, we just have active phase again. So this literature we can also divide into three topics or into three stages. First of all, it was texts which show us that the new reality is the reflecting of the unsolved problem of the 20th century, unsolved national problem of the 20th century. So they were the text of the memory. The phenomenon of the communicative memory, which was the main line in almost in each of these texts, which were published during 2014 and 2015 years, when the war was seemed to be very short and like something which couldn't happen in the 21st century. So in those texts, we can read about the national experience of the past. We can read about the family experience of the past, individual experience, and also these novels, mostly novels, yes, these writings shows us how the process of destroying of the ideological myth of brotherhood, about which I mentioned above, was holding in the context of this war and also in the context of this new reality. These texts were some prehistory of the creating of this new language of Ukrainian and maybe the new language of the reality of the whole world. Among them, there are such as, for example, Mariupol process of Halina Vdovichenko, Ilovaisk of Yevhen Polozhi, Life PS of Valeria Burlakova, the poems from the war of Borys Grinchenko, etc. Such kind of texts not solved but represent very important problems connected not only with the cultural understanding of Ukrainians, with the cultural understanding of the history, with the cultural understanding of the actual war. Here we can find the trying to solve the problem of the conflict of identities, which was introduced in the mass media during a long period of Ukrainian independence. I mean, conflict of identities between Western Ukrainians and Eastern Ukrainians. When the Western Ukrainians tried to connect their identity historically with the Europe, and the Western Ukrainians tried to connect to explain their identities, maybe not with Russia, but mostly with the Soviet Union. This is the paradox, because they saw themselves in the state which was ended more than 20 years ago. I mean, at the period of 2014. This text also reflects such problems as Soviet pseudo-values, the shadow of elder brother, different memories of one family, for example, region as an orphanage, warrior woman, who are Ukrainians in the 20th century, yes, and who are they now, how they see themselves. These books also reflect the problems of genres of literature. For example, is the poetry of war possible in this way, about which we know this kind of literature? The second, the second type of the literature of war is such texts which reflect trauma of war. And here we can talk a lot about the language of this tragedy, because here the main role played not only the professional authors, but first of all the authors who became the writers in the war, who get the traumatic experience which just couldn't be working through in another way. But here we can also find texts belonging also to the professional authors, but those one who became the soldier and who became the participant of the war in the front, in the battles, yes? So here we have the option of writer warrior, and this is very valuable literature. For example, mentioned book, the poems from the war belong to Borys Grinchenko. The second one is writing as a new experience, and here it is very important to notice, to mention also two books belonging to the authors who had never written any literary text before the war. And here I'm speaking about the life piece of Valeria Burlakova and the footsteps on the road of Valery Ananyev. So the first book tells us about the experience of the woman, the soldier woman, who had lost the beloved person, the beloved man on the war. This book is written in the form of diary, and writing a diary here is represented as an attempt to get out of the trauma of the close person's death. Here, author also tried to searching for the cultural context to justify one's pain. And this is very important aspect of searching of this language when you can't find the words to express your own feeling, to express your own trauma, because this trauma is too deep. In this way, the author tries to find the same experience, the similar experience in the world practices. And she just shows us that the war is not something new, but every understanding, every reliving of this experience is different, is hard, is awful. And sometimes there is no language, there is no meanings which could express your traumatic experience. So Valeria Burlakova just searched such contexts, for example, in the literature of her colleagues, Ukrainians, yes, for example, in the text of Yuri Guts, in the text of foreign authors, like Jerome Salinger and others. And the third aspect of this text is an attempt to visualize traumatic experience, because the story is illustrated by the paintings making by the author with the help of the pen. These paintings are very easy. Yes, they are without any images. It could be some humors. It could be some words, some phrases. For example, 25 reasons for what I love you, for what you are the best, and for what I love you. And this is like some picture. Yes. And the second text which reflects this literature of trauma of war is the footsteps on the road. And I want also to mention that the first text, Life PS, was published in 2016, and the second one was published in 2018. So it was before the full-scale invasion of Russian army. The footsteps on the road reflected not only the experience of one soldier, but this is also here presented. The plot of this book is wider, yes, because here the author tried to show the history of the generation which became the basis of this struggle, of this historical struggle against the Russians' ambitions to colonize Ukraine again in contemporary. This book consists of three parts: heart, despair, and hope. And hope is that part which reflects the experience of war of the main hero, and which shows us how why this generation was ready to stand before this challenge of the history, and why it became successful in this war. The author shows us that he and his colleagues, they find their self on this war. They understood their selves. Of course, the fates of most of them are tragic. A lot of representatives of this generation were killed on this war. But there's example show that even if you have the traumatic experience of decades colonization, there is something in your identity which couldn't be killed with this colonization. It's still alive, and it gives you possibility to stand for struggle for your possibility, for your needs to be Ukrainian. So here we have the solution of such problems as self-identification, finding the words for the trauma of war, and exposure of propaganda. And what is main also, that a lot of stories included in the plot of this novel is illustrated by the QR codes, and when we read this course, we can be in the process of battles. We can be in the front. We can be in this war. We can relive it with the heroes of the novel. And the next option, the next stage of this literature of war, is the texts of war shock, literature of war shock. And here we are speaking about the experience of the full-scale invasion of Russian army, which was on the 24th of February 2022. And here we are speaking about such options as attempts to understand the war, refining the language of the war, because if we were speaking that the language of the war was finding during the 80 years before this full-scale invasion, but in this case, this language just couldn't work. And that's why a lot of the authors stood before the problem how to express these feelings which they felt at that night and at the nearest days. Why that previous language didn't work? Because nobody couldn't imagine that something like this great war could happen in the 21st century, which is the century of globalization, the century of information without borders, cultures without borders, the century of new nomads, when the young people can find themselves in any places in the world. At the moment, the borders of Ukraine became locked. Everything changed. Everything just returned to the beginning. Ukrainians stand before the struggle for their own lives. That's why any previous language couldn't do at this situation. And the third one, these texts which were written and were publishing during the first day and during the first weeks after the full-scale invasion became the cultural therapy for a lot of people who couldn't understood themselves in the new reality, in the reality of the war. And I would like to say that those texts written after the 24th February, they belong not only to the professional authors. Most of them, especially poetry, belongs to the amateurs who tried to find their own voice in this situation and to reflect the clearest feelings, the naive feelings, but they were the most real feelings. Those texts were no professional, they were no literary at the way we just got used to read poetry, to understand and to accept poetry. They were easy, but very deep and very natural. And here we can find, during the first year, there were published a lot of texts, a lot of poems, a lot of short stories, some novels, but there were also published some books, especially anthologies, which tried to include all these literary experience. Here we must also notice why such kind of literature became possible in these shocked circumstances. First of all, there was some literary authority or literary experience, and here we have to speak about the previous literature. Those one which was written during the all decades of Ukrainian independence, about which I was mentioned about, and about these texts which were written during the Russian-Ukrainian war from the very beginning, from the 2014. Secondly, we have to talk about the availability of platforms for public disclosure. And here the main role played the social networks, because everyone could write something and publish it on their own pages in the social networks, and every reader can read such kind of text and can find the needing words to express their own feelings if they can't do it by themselves. And third one is reader request or reader expectation, and this option is can be explained in such a way that most of us just couldn't realize ourselves in these circumstances of shock. That's why any words, especially artistic words, gives possibility to in one way to escape from the reality into the artistic text, yes, and from the other side to find the needed way to express ourselves, yes, as a reader, as a people who couldn't who hadn't any protection, who hadn't any possibility to speak, to understand, to realize, because it was really the situation of shock. So I return back, and here I want also to return to the beginning when I was speaking about the changing of literature role. And here, when we are speaking about this kind of text, this is represented very clear. So during the last year, there were published a few very important books, among them anthologies of poems, for example, or anthologies of different kinds of genres. Before you, there is one of them. The main things in this book is that the author of introduction to the anthology is the General Valery Zaluzhny. So it means that literature became, first of all, as I have said, the source of information. Secondly, the instrument of the therapy, cultural therapy. And thirdly, it became the aspect which make the diffusion of different kinds of social being. What I mean? I mean that the culture is represented as closely connected with politics, with history, with army, because in the context of war, it couldn't be in another way. So, as I have mentioned, there were published a few important books. The first one is the anthology of poems, Без укриття, without saving. So this anthology includes poems belonging to the well-known writers and also belonging to the amateurs. The importance of this book is in that the poems in a very deep way shows us the first emotion, show us the feeling and reliving by the person, by the lyric heroes, the state of affect effect of the first hours of full-scale invasion, the first days of the full-scale invasion. Besides of these, some of the authors tried to, during the first days of the war, they tried to see the future of this situation, especially the future of Ukrainian society, such as Igor Ostapenko, for example, when he, his lyric hero, asked somebody, maybe himself, maybe potential reader, what will be with children who get those traumatic experience. Children who became angels didn't have time to become people. Children who were killed by the Russian army. Will the children of this war have time to become parents? Do they have the future, even if they stay alive? These are very important questions for which there is no any answer for today. But this is also the process of trying to form, to search and to form this new language which reflect this tragic, traumatic reality of the war. The second anthology is The War 2022, and it includes not only the poetry, but also diaries and essays. And here is also very important thing in this book. The thought belonged to Oleg Kotsarev, well-known author in Ukrainian literature, who also asked the question and answer on his own question, for what is this war for Russians? He answers, Russia's war against Ukraine is also the war against Ukrainian past, memory, identity, and continuing of the culture. And the third one is book belonged to the concrete author, to Oksana Zabushko. And this is her essay, a long essay, The Longest Journey. Here the author tried to explain the thing, the understanding of this war from the point of view of history experience of Ukrainian and Russian relationship. And she made a conclusion that this war has two options. First of all, it is 30 years or 30 years war, because it began at the beginning of Ukrainian independence, because Russia couldn't understand it, couldn't permit Ukraine to be independent after the crash of the Soviet Union. And the second one, Zabushko proposed us the option of 300 years war, connected with the Ukrainian dependent from the Russia in her different historical forms, Russian Empire or Soviet Union or Russian Federation, etc. But the main conclusion of this essay is that during the first decade of the new century, Ukraine made a very important decision. In this historical struggle, Ukraine chose to be. I suppose that it is not a time to making some conclusion, because the war is still going on. And I think, it seems to me that there will be a lot of texts publishing during the previous years. But speaking about those ones which were mentioned here, we can make some conclusion. First of all, the language of war in modern literature is gradually changing from artistic language to the new sincereness one. Secondly, language becomes a tool for visualizing and for searching of the meaning of war. Thirdly, it is transformed into a mechanism for speaking about the trauma of both the individual and the nation as a whole. And the last one, language applies modern achievement of globalization. The purpose of this is to spread the cultural discourse of war over a wide area, making it accessible to people of different ages and nationalities. This is all for this time. I thank you for your attention and wish you a peace sky above your heads. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.